Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on identifying and exploring proficiency testing PT resources. We have Doug Berg, our technical program manager, that will be providing an overview. Doug, if you can click to the next slide for me.
Okay.
Really on a few things, because we do have a lot of questions that come up, and we thought that this webinar, would be useful for everyone, because in many cases, we have laboratories that might do unique testing or even calibration where there might not be a provider that's available, a third-party provider. And the question comes up a lot, well, what do I do now? Every accreditation body that is an approved ILAC signatory is required to have a policy on, that very same question. What do we do now if there's no third-party provider available? So we're going to talk about, what that is, what the options are. Also looking at the criteria for third-party providers. We're not going to go over 17043 and that accreditation particularly, but what's really important is that when you are using a third-party provider, it is something that, as a 17025 accredited laboratory, it's not mandatory, but just like you as a laboratory might want to promote that accreditation, the PT providers also have a standard for them, and that's one level of a credential you should be looking for when you're selecting a PT provider, is do they have that particular accreditation. We're also going to look at, how do you look at your scope of accreditation and determine, what PT provider is best well suited for you. How do you do the frequency and setup of your PT plan and criteria? So with all that information, we can go ahead and move on with the next slide. Just some webinar housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and as you may notice, you are muted and will remain muted for the entire for this entire webinar. However, we do encourage that you use the questions toolbar, which should show up on your right. As Doug is presenting today and you have questions, feel free to go ahead and fill those in, and we will go ahead and answer those at the end. Once this webinar is over, again, it is recorded. It will be available to you, as well as the slides for download on our website. Next slide. Okay, so to introduce Doug, if you don't know Doug, Doug has been with PJLA since 2006 as our testing program manager, also manages our reference material and proficiency testing program. But before that, he has over 45 years of experience in testing, calibrations, reference material, also working with PTs. Doug has been quite the asset for PJLA over the years. He's very supportive of us getting our approval back in the day with the ILAC MRA, and also has became a APLAC APAC evaluator. So with that, Doug, I would like you to, you can go ahead and get started, and thank you very much for your time today.
Okay. This is this slide here is just simply a repeat of the one that just preceded the immediate preceding one. Just making sure that this is what we're going to be doing here. Is we're going to touch base on each of these items. Obviously, you can probably spend a couple hours or an hour on just about all of them individually, but we definitely it's to give you kind of an overall perspective, and to, I think for some folks too, it might clarify what the PT requirements actually are and what sort of resources that are available to you. So as Tracy had mentioned, we're a internationally recognized PT accrediting body, and we credit, obviously testing laboratories, calibration laboratories, but we also accredit reference material producers and PT providers. So the ILAC, which is the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, has a specifically that impacts testing and just about everybody. Calibration has a document called P9, which is a policy document. for the accreditation bodies to use in terms of evaluating use of evaluating proficiency testing in the accreditation process. Now, the ILAC is international. There are regional accreditation groups, PJLA, along with the other American accreditation bodies, are members of the Asia Pacific Lab Accreditation Cooperation. In Europe, it's the EA, and they also have a guidance document on proficiency testing participation, which for the Europeans takes the ILAC document and it's in agreement with that. And one of the things about their document was kind of interesting, is given its time that it was developed and when it was developed and released, was it started a lot of conversation with regards to risk in terms of proficiency testing participation. The document that we as an accreditation organizations follow, just like we laboratories, we hold to ISO IEC 17025 and so forth, is we have to comply with ISO IEC 1711 2017. It's requirements for accreditation bodies accrediting conformity assessment bodies, which are CABs, as people like to refer to them. Those are testing organizations, calibration organizations, and so forth. But it says that in the context of this document, the activities covered by the accreditation are include but are not limited to as I mentioned, testing, calibration, inspection, certification of management systems, which we do not do, persons, and so forth. There are around the world, there are accredited qualification type programs, products, processes, and services, and then provision of proficiency testing and production of reference materials. And then there are validation and verification activities that are also, we for example, as PJLA could do those, but we don't. As we talk, there's one of the things we always like to try to use is consistent terms and references. So another thing to look at is ISO IEC 17000, which is it's the vocabulary and general principles. So when they use the term proficiency testing, they mean certain thing. When they use interlaboratory comparisons, they mean specifically something distinct from that. So when we talk about accreditation, it's a third-party attestation related to conformity assessment bodies, conveying formal demonstration of their competence to carry out specific conformity attestment tasks. So that would say, well, are they a calibrator? Yes, they're a calibrator. Okay, so then we then would attest that they can demonstrate competence in being a calibrator, or a combination of a calibrator and a testing organization. So an accreditation body that refers to people like PJLA, A2LA, ANAB, IAS, other bodies around the world, it says that they like to use the term authoritative, that we perform these types of accreditation. So when we talk about accreditation, it means something specific, and it has bearing on us, because we'll talk about requirements for PT and interlaboratory comparison in the accreditation process. So again, the term that I said, a conformity assessment body, is a body that performs conformity assessment activities that can be the object of accreditation. So if we go back a couple slides, it says, well, what types of are those activities? Well, they're calibration, they're testing, they're proficiency test providers, they're qualifiers of people. There's all that list. Okay, so we reference material. So we're in the testing, calibration, PT provider and reference material conformity assessments. We're interested in those particular areas. So a conformity assessment activity is the activity conducted by a conformity assessment body. Now, that sounds like the was it something stamp out redundancy department or something like that. But when assessing conformity, now that again, it says, well, what are these notes? At the bottom, it says, well, what are we really looking, what are you looking at? You can see there's quite an expansive list of potential accreditation activities that, in terms of what type of organizations they would accredit. So you'd have testing, calibration, inspection, and so forth. So when we talk about proficiency testing itself and the things that are applicable, how would you apply what would be proficiency testing requirements? It could be in any one of these areas, but I think we are ourselves are used to thinking of them in terms of testing and calibration, but also and maybe inspection. But if you look, it's quite broad, including the actual provision of proficiency testing itself, and certainly reference material production. So there also is a statistical document, reference document. It's ISO 13528. It's fairly recent in its current issue of 2022. It did go back to 2015, and it talks about what sort of appropriate statistical methods would be appropriate for proficiency test providers in the designing of testing schemes and so forth. The reason why I think this is informative is we'll talk later about an alternative to formal proficiency testing might be simply interlaboratory comparisons. So you'd say, okay, well, given that this is an interlaboratory comparison of, say, 3 laboratories, and it's a measurable process, then you'd say, okay, well, what sort of statistical analysis would be appropriate? And so this would be a good reference that you could look at. And it says these procedures can be applied to demonstrate that the measurement results obtained by the laboratories or inspection bodies and individuals meet specified criteria for acceptable performance. And these can also, just as they also talk about here, is that they can be applied for the assessment of things like expert opinions, where opinions or judgments are reported in the form and they can be compared objectively with an independent reference value or a consensus statistic. So, we do have a lot of testing where there might be a quantitative method, but also there's a qualitative type evaluation or of something as well. So the question is, well, as an assessor, for example, what would an assessor look at when he's looking at the CABs, the conformity assessments bodies, interlaboratory comparison data? What sort of things would be appropriate? And it's always got to look for being inappropriate. But what sort of value, in a sense, do you really get out of that, or is the qualification and the evaluation totally subjective? So a lot of I'm sure we might have people online right now that are proficiency testing providers or they're reference material producers, but we're going to kind of concentrate a bit on here on the vast majority of our accredited CABs are either testing or calibration organizations, and so therefore 17025 ISO IEC 17025 has a particular meaning and importance, and that's probably to the audience. So just as a refresher, because I'm sure that everybody is very, very well versed in the requirements of of 17025 or their particular other relevant documents that we say that the laboratories in general we expect it's a shall, by the way, shall monitor their performance by comparison with other laboratories where available and appropriate. So there's that in there. There's that you'd say, well, is it appropriate to compare a lab for this particular test or something like that with other labs? And that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. And we as an accrediting body have to be aware of that and have what we would consider appropriate documentation of that, so that when we go through our evaluations, and it just so happens this gets reviewed by our peer evaluators, that they would understand maybe why a certain area, couple or lab that they might be looking at didn't exactly meet the expectations on that, but and we'll learn later what sort of things that we as an accrediting body would have to have in the package to justify that. So how could it says if it is available, what does it mean where available and appropriate? Well, there may be an interlaboratory comparison. That if you look down here at option B, is it says, well, participation in an interlaboratory comparison other than what they it gets defined as proficiency testing. So there could be some interlab comparison as opposed to when in fact, if we go up to A, there isn't a quote a proficiency testing proficiency testing program, whether that's accredited or not. So doesn't say accredited proficiency testing. It just says proficiency testing, and that an interlaboratory comparison could be the best alternative in the absence of something that would be meaningful. Now, one of the things in 17025 it talks about is that as we noted earlier with the EA document, is the 17025 talks about risks and opportunities. So in this case, we're talking about the laboratory itself. Well, one of the items that might be affected by availability of a formal PT program, availability of meaningful interlaboratory programs, or the unavailability of those, then looking at it in terms of risks and opportunities, what would be meaningful alternatives? And being able, if they do that, then that itself is evidence of taking actions to address risks and opportunities that they would have to define those and indicate why they're not specifically meeting that. Oops, excuse me. There we go. Now one of the things that we would look at in that regard is, while this is a note, it's an expository note, that while the document specifies that the organization has plans to address risks, there's no requirement for a formal risk management type document of application of a documented risk management process. However, it does mean that there has to be something that could be examined during the assessment process, and maybe the evaluation of the package and whatnot, that would indicate that the lab has in fact looked at in light of the availability of PT or interlaboratory comparisons, how did they deal with the risk that posed if they didn't participate in terms of their results in light of the requirements of 17025 and the other documents. So it says that actions to address risk and opportunity shall be proportional to the potential impact on the validity of the results. So it could be avoiding threats, taking risk in order to pursue an opportunity, eliminating the risk source, changing the likelihood of consequences, sharing the risk, and so forth. And opportunities can lead to expanding the scope of the laboratory activities in terms of addressing new customers and so forth. It's particularly if you're getting involved in some completely new activity, such that there's not a feasible or even an available inter-laboratory possibility, whether it be an accredited or non-accredited formal PT program or just an inter-laboratory comparison. And you'd say, well, now we got to figure out what we are going to do, and we assess the risks of that and be able to discuss that during the assessment process. So just to be clear, an inter-laboratory comparison is not, may or may not be part of a proficiency testing plan. Maybe in terms of how proficiency testing is defined, it may be, it's an interlaboratory comparison is an actual formal defined activity. It has to be something that is, not just off the cuff, so to speak. In other words, you actually, and you really kind of lay it out and plan it with the understanding that you have to do it because it's the best alternative. And so it can be anything that the laboratories do. If we go back to the activities that conformity assessment bodies get involved in, it could be, it could be observations, it could be measurements, it could be testing, calibration, sampling, examination, inspection. And the term measurement and tests, although it's used throughout the document, now this, we're talking, the document here is in fact the ISO IEC 17043, that is the document for proficiency testing, formal proficiency testing accreditation, that it does even in there recognize inter-laboratory comparisons. So when it uses the term measurements and tests throughout that document, it kind of understands that these could be qualitative, quantitative, interpretive, and or otherwise qualified. And another is in general, just saying that interlaboratory comparisons that involve measurement convey more insight when measurement uncertainty is considered. Now, in interpretive type testing or more qualitative type testing, you can still have factors that would affect uncertainty. So, let's just say there's something where you're looking at a color match. And when we were preparing for this program, the person who was helping me become familiar with the GoToMeeting told me to click on a certain color button on the control panel. And I had to ask, where is that exactly? And she said, I said, because I got to tell you something. I said, I'm red-green colorblind. And so it looked red to me. It's what I interpreted red to be. But I would definitely, and the reason why I'm going into that is I would not be a good person to look at something that would be a color change of some material, subject to a test procedure. And so that's one of the things I'm always, now being over 70 and having been colorblind since my birth, I've gotten reasonably accommodated to it. But there's still something that'll crop up just about every day or two that, you know, I'm not completely colorblind. I'm not, life is not a black and white television to me, but it is it's something I have to be aware of when I'm looking at things in terms of red and green and so forth, purple and blue. So now under the ISO IEC 17043-23, they talk about proficiency testing. That's as defined. If you look in the 3.7 there indicates where it's alternatively identified in the another ISO document, is designed and operated in one or more proficiency testing rounds for a specified area of measurement, testing, calibration, examination, sampling, or inspection. So all of those could be subject, would be fall under an activity for which there would be reason, you know, you would tend to have proficiency testing. And we recall that back from some previous slides as well. And and when it talks in this document about customers and clients, they view that those are alternatives terms for the same people, and would be in the interpretation of 17043, they would be viewed as interchangeable and equivalent. The reason why that is there are some programs that are kind of quasi-governmental programs that are required in certain regulatory activities, where really the customer is it in a sense is it may be a government entity, and the people who participate in it are not, you know, are the participants, and they required to participate in it, but there's the activity itself is sponsored through a government program. I think that that's becoming less of a view. You know, they used to say, well, they used to be an inhibition to becoming active in those areas, because they said, well, we can only handle 25 in the country or something like that. And you'd say, well, what about, I could be number 26, and they go, nope, only 25. You know, so I think with the that they're getting away from that type of design in their programs. Now, an interlaboratory comparison involved the measurements convey. This is a repeat. Is that the repeat of if you do have interlaboratory comparisons, whether they're proficiency programs or just merely interlaboratory comparisons, they have a little bit more value when measurement uncertainty is factored in, and that measurement uncertainty can be factored in through some sort of hard statistical analysis or consideration of factors that don't lend themselves to statistical analysis. When we talk about proficiency test providers, is they offer what would be called schemes, and a PT scheme is proficiency testing designed and operated in one or more rounds for a specified area of measurement, testing, calibration, sampling, or inspection. So in some of our slides that we'll see later, we can see that these schemes can take a variety of different appearances, you might say, because of their individual features. It says a proficiency scheme can cover a particular type of activity or a number of activity types within the same area. Again, we talked about the customer and client and so forth. Now, you say, well, all of this is kind of as clear as mud, but what is it that PJLA is going to be looking at? Well, again, we have to operate within the framework of ISO 17011 and the appropriate documents that govern the program, whether it's testing and calibration, or proficiency test provider, or reference material producer, and the like. And but those types of activities is that you say, well, then how do we construct a proficiency test justification based on our scope, and it's very scope dependent, and other features that affect those particular items on your scope. So what we look at is we look at the category of, now we've written our document PL1, which is the our application of the other external documents regarding proficiency testing, as summarized in PL1. So it says, if you notice, it says category of calibrations or set of tests intended to quantify or evaluate common parameters. Well, one could say, well, what if you're a PT provider? And you say, well, do you actually do anything that would be a calibration or a test in there? Now, you can construct a PT program where you say, well, it does involve testing, but I have all of that testing is subcontracted. Oh, okay. So who do you subcontract with? And then they say, well, we only deal with accredited testing providers. Well, if they're accredited, then we as PJLA understand that might be accredited by one of the other accrediting bodies, maybe even in another country. That they too then those accrediting bodies are in fact have the performance of proficiency testing per the types of, and consistent with the documents that we've just gone through, that they have, that they would be, those accrediting bodies would be enforcing those expectations as well. So we would classify, we say, well, what's important when you're putting together, and we're evaluating potential PT programs that affect an organization that we're accrediting. So we'd say, well, since we basically handle calibrations and testing, and we would get involved with people who might be reference material producers, but they also do testing, which would be appropriate, or they also do testing or calibrations as part of the PT programs that they do, then we'd look at that because they're doing that type of work. So we say, well, so a discipline is the category of calibrations or a set of tests intended to quantify or evaluate common parameters of a unit, device, or a substance, or whatever that were submitted for where that calibration and testing is appropriate. And then we look at what's the subdiscipline. So at minimum, a subdiscipline is an element of an associated calibration or test discipline for which the magnitude of a stated parameter has been defined as a measurement objective and will be determined by a specified method using appropriate skills and equipment. And it says a subdiscipline may be, it doesn't have to be, may be composed of one or more such elements where the organization has determined that the measurement objective, the specified method, and the appropriate equipment are either identical or similar to a degree that they can be considered mutually representative. So if you have a particular test that is kind of based on what the equipment is, and you'd say, well, it falls, say, within a mechanical, we'll use mechanical, say a mechanical discipline, and you have a piece of equipment that can do a large number of things, and by doing so, I can have quite a few different things that I can apply it to, but functionally and fundamentally, they would be pretty much mutually. I could pick any one of them, and if they're good on, if they perform satisfactorily in terms of proficiency on one of those, it would represent more than one, like the whole family. And we'll see where we're going with that, because I think there is a kind of, sometimes assessors get off on saying something that is not necessarily applicable, and they kind of, I think, become I've seen that not only with us, but in my time, I had over 14 different laboratory scopes that I was the proud owner of, one might say. And my accrediting body guys would be all over me about that. I had to do my PT plan had to address every test on the scope. I said, that's not necessarily true. And we used to have quite a few go-arounds regarding that. In addition, the organization shall have determined that the successful performance either would be satisfactory objective evidence of technical competency necessary to successfully perform the others. So something to keep in mind. Oops. Now, in our PL1, we say, well, what's our expectations on that? And we'll take a look at a little bit more detail on the previous page. But what's what is it that we're looking for on an initial accreditation? Well, we say, well, objective evidence for at least one item on the proposed scope of an acceptable proficiency testing. Now, what's acceptable? Well, right off the bat, we'll talk about this a little bit later too in more detail, is, well, certainly a third-party program, whether it's accredited or not. Of course, it could be totally disreputable too. If it's totally disreputable, then that's another thing. Or an inter-laboratory comparison, and those would be, they would either be acceptable, but it should be something that is within 12 months of the date of the initial assessment. Can't be something you did 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It has to be something within the 12 months before the start of the assessment, or at least roughly the start of the assessment. You're off a little bit. And then when you're accredited, we expect that you'll perform PT annually, and that you will give evidence of favorable performance of each discipline over a 4-year period. So that didn't say each item on your scope. It says discipline over a 4-year period, and that changes can be made by PJLA if proposed by the CAB, the conformity assessment body. If you added something, you wanted to do more, you wanted to do something more frequently. Maybe you have you're part of an organization that you have opportunities to do interlaboratory comparisons on a much higher frequency, and it's kind of expected within the, you see this with groups of laboratories that we accredit, that they themselves have programs that on key things that they are much more frequent. And of course, they're meeting the requirements, obviously, but they're in some cases exceeding them by quite a bit. Now, for programs such as the NELAC Institute, programs, the DOD, DOE programs, the EPA National Lead Assessment Program. You have to follow whatever their program requirements are involving proficiency testing. And for example, the EPA National Lead Program, it's 4 times per year. You have to do it each thing 4 times for paint chips, dust, and soil, provided you do those matrices. If you don't do soil analysis, you don't have to do PT and soil. And only you have to get that those specimens only from AIHA. And AIHA scores those. They have their own scoring system. They get back to you. But one of the things they do is they send the results to the accrediting body. In which case, they send them to, if you're accredited by PJLA, you sign basically that you're going to allow them to send them to us. Now, in these other environmental things, it's twice a year, and much more in depth in terms of analytes and matrices. And again, those results get sent to PJLA, and if you're accredited by us, or if you're accredited by ANAB, they'll send them to ANAB. And it's all analyte and matrix combinations in every 6 months, plus or minus 2 months. So, because sometimes they don't quite hit that exactly on the 6-month period, but it can't be outside that 6 or 2 month window. I think if there's something totally outside of the lab's control, but you're trying to, you are keeping up, that I think reasonably they're going to accept something that was not something that was the lab failed to meet that window just because they omitted, slipped their mind or something like that. So I've often said, we allow you to define a PT plan in general, and you can do so with a fair degree of flexibility, and do so with good rationale behind it, and you can explain that, and you're looking at potentially what the risks are, and you can have those discussions with your assessor, or you can have those discussions with program manager at PJLA. And if it seems like that you're making a good attempt at addressing all the items on your scope effectively, again, we don't have to do each and every item on your scope, but if you are in fact in one of these programs like we just talked about, well, that's part of being in the program. So you'd say, well, we have a document that some people actually interpret that you have to fill it out. And that's not true. It's the LF81, and we when you're talking to labs, do they have to fill that out? And we say no. If you've got some other document, you could have a verbal description of what your PT program is, and if it addresses all the requirements that we would be looking at, as we've discussed in the last few slides, that'd be perfectly fine too. But we did have folks who said, "Oh, please give us a document. Oh, please, if we fill that out, is that okay?" And we like, okay. So it's just to stress, the PJLA LF81 is not a requirement. What's required is a plan. You have to have a plan, and the plan has to do certain things, as we kind of address. So other formats can be used to a plan, whole or in part. Sometimes you might use the LF81 for mechanical testing, but for chemical testing, you're involved with this particular product. You're involved in some other thing where there's an industry or major customer round robin program, and you say, okay, so we're in that, but we're also, for the things that don't fall in there, we have this other thing over here. So the assessors need to be flexible, and you folks need to be able to have discussions about why you have things split up. But that's perfectly fine. Like I said too, for programs like the TNI, the DOE, DOE, and so forth on those previous slides, well, if you're in that program, we know what you're going to be doing. So, and you know what you're going to be doing. So it could be just, I'm committed to this program for this part of my, I have a scope, and this is my scope for the DOE, DOD. I got other things on my broader scope that aren't, but on these things, we're committed to the program. So we're going to be part of that every 6 month thing. Okay. Sounds to me like that's a plan. What are you going to be doing for those things that aren't DOD and DOE? That would be just the thing you'd follow. So the LF81, I described this here in my original slide, but because for some reason I originally was having difficulty having an example of the LF81, and so I said, well, if I can't get that done, I just got that done about an hour before the presentation here. So this is not the best. Maybe I can blow the. Oops, excuse me. I was trying to make it bigger, but I can't. If you folks who are familiar with this, you got to put your name up at the top and identify yourself. And then if you notice, there's all these lines. I got 10 lines there. You can, if you got a bigger scope, it can go beyond 10, get another page. If you notice, though, it says, okay, what it talked about, well, what are you, in the gray area, you would type in or handprint, if you can do that, the calibration or test discipline. You go, oh, okay. So, and then you'd put the sub-discipline below it. So notice that doesn't mean, again, per se, that you would have to list all the tests you do. It's just that the tests that would be in a specific case, but you would have what are we doing here? Well, it's my discipline is mechanical testing, or material testing, you could call it, and what I'm doing is tensile testing. Okay, that's one thing. You say, well, I do tensile on steel. I can do tensile. I do it to ASTM this and ASTM this, and I can do it. You don't have to get into that level of detail. It's like if you do tensile testing, and you got one tensile tester, successful performance on what would be your most meaningful, and probably the one that you maybe have the most trouble with. Because why? You say, well, I know that that if we're doing that okay, then the rest of them we're doing okay. And you'd say, okay, that sounds to me like a risk assessment. Oh, assessment of risk. We can go back to that. But anyway, you indicate this up. And by the way, the other thing is, this is a plan. Okay, it's not a blood oath. So if there's things that arise in your plan, so if we're talking about something that occurred this year that you originally planned that you would do the next year, and something that you had this year, you know that you're going to be doing that next year, you adjusted your plan. You didn't lose anything. You didn't fall out of the requirement. You just moved some things around on your plan, maybe due to availability. So it's something that you then, if you make changes to it and so forth, you can annotate it. I document that somehow, because particularly 2 years later, or if somebody else is going to take this and talk to the assessor about it, the assessor says, well, did you do that in that year? No, we changed it next year. Well, okay. So what did you do? Well, then they have the whole story is okay. So, but you could say, well, I changed it, and this is Rev 2. Okay, well, that's fine too, but still, what changed it? And it could be very, very reasonable that you had an opportunity to move something up, and you couldn't perform what you'd planned to, you know you're going to do it next year, and then what you do is say, okay, well then we'll move this over, and that'll still meet the overall plan. And two is these things, if you think about it, if you're not changing your scope a lot, you could over time, what you would be doing is moving certain tests or certain material types into that tensile test slot on the subdiscipline. So over time, you'd be changing that too. So again, it's a plan. So this is the second page, the kind of like the explanation page that goes along with the LF81. Now, the thing there is, like I said, LF81 is not mandatory. So whatever you have, this is still this kind of content is what would be looking at for the plan. So under this laboratory kind of a calibration lab, we have a calibration lab and a testing lab. In this case, it says, well, we've got roughly 4 categories. We've got dimensional, mechanical, chemical, and electrical. If we go back to the slide, these would be the disciplines. And you say, well, under dimensional, we're going to put in the plan that we would do outside micrometer. Well, is that the one that if you could do that, then if you could do the other things in dimensional, or is this one that requires a little bit more skill, and that'd be a good thing? And they say, yeah, that, and we're going to do that in this case because this is the document that needs to be updated. It says, well, we're going to do that in the given year. Now it says, well, what kind will it be? And they say, well, in this case, there is a third-party provider for that, and we'll use a third-party provider for that. Now, if you look down at the next line, it says indirect verification of Rockwell hardness under mechanical. It says here that they're going to do an interlaboratory comparison, maybe with another company down the street, whatever. Now, I do know you definitely can get third-party Rockwell. So, but if you chose to do the interlaboratory, because we view those as not quite the same as a third-party program, but the fact is you could have it and it'd be equivalent. Well, that's fine. It's not a intra-laboratory program, so it would be an interlaboratory program. So again, as we go through here, we have a chemical thing. You say, well, the only chemical thing on my scope is we do pH meters as calibration. You go, okay, well then for that on your plan, that's going to be the same thing. It'll only be pH meters on your plan, and you'll do that every 4 years. And then the same thing is true like electrical. Down here in testing, you can see this again. This has got environmental testing, it's got mechanical testing, and chemical testing, and biological testing. Similar type of thing is on the plan is you've got a sub discipline that then is around specific tests. But again, those types of things you would say, if I do well on that test on a representative sample, then anything else that would also be a sub discipline within that is I can handle that. So again, it's and your scope. If you don't, again, I always say you don't have to fill it out exactly like this, but it should be equivalent. Is that your scope is your scope, and if you have another lab across town that you kind of view that you're, for want of a better term, you're kind of competitors, their scope might be different, and the reason for that is just simply because even though you kind of do the same things, their scope would be different. Doesn't make yours bad. Doesn't make theirs bad. Doesn't make yours, one way or the other. Does it in fact meet the requirements of up the chain from PJLA up to what the expectations are in the documents that we have to make sure that you're complying with. So one of the things here is, I said, we also were going to talk about, so I think we got through the plan and requirements. But one of the things is we said, well, how do you find out, how do you find out stuff about these providers? And you'd say, where are these providers? And we said, well, I kind of over time frame, I tell people that there are no secret accreditations for anybody. We always publish scopes, and that includes people that we accredit as proficiency testing providers. So, well, we're going to kind of do a little example stuff here. Now, this is, I always want to get this out of the way, is under that TNI program. The TNI, they specify where you're going to get your PTs from. Now, they don't say that the lab has to be accredited to, they just say, no, these are the labs, and they publish that on their website. So if you happen to be in that program, you want to find out where I can get PT from. Now, also, they not necessarily with these folks do they offer all the PTs you would need to take necessarily, but they do. It's TNI publishes this list. So just to let you know that. I said in general, what you have to try to find competent providers. All the ILAC/APAC U.S. recognized PT providers are on the accrediting body's websites. We have to put them on the website. So who in the U.S. And us, and I really should have put the Canadians on here as well. But is that, and you'll see that. The same would be true with perhaps but the actual in the United States type or itself, PJLA, A2LA, ANAB, and IAS do accredit PT providers. Now you'd say, well, what about those people who do that dust thing? And they say, well, that's that program. Okay, AIHA does. They run that program. They are an accrediting body, and but that's their program. Now, so all of these sites have searchable features, but they're not all as easy to search as among themselves. So now there is a outside of that right off the bat, and I'll show you. I'll take a step outside. The Germany has the Bundesamt für Materialien, which is their kind of like Germany's NIST. And apparently that somebody over there has the A, the money, B, the time, and C, the staffing to maintain a what's called a European PT information system, and that's EPTIS. And that went first online in the year 2000, and they add to it. And so that it's available at eptis.bam.de, and you can search by country, testing field or calibration field, product groups, accreditation, yes or no, other, whatever. It is when I get a call, and I can't rattle off the top of my head, who would be a good PT provider. And I'll do that if I can, but a lot of times when people ask, I'll say, well, I'll go and look on EPTIS. Now, there's certain things there. I mean, this is worldwide, so, but you can narrow that down. So, for example, I said, it does take some practice and patience to work with it. I'll just be honest with that. Its user interface is a little. I think it's back from the year 2000. It's a little kludgy. But in this case, it identifies things by country, I'll say. So I said, Italy. And I said, testing fields. Well, calibration field. I said, electrotechnic electronics. That's how they have it on their on their menu. Product groups. I said, electrical electronic devices. And I said, do you want only an accredited lab? And I said, yeah, I'll take an accredited lab. So what I got here, if you look, is there were several rows because it has the individual, oops, excuse me, the individual item. And I'll admit I picked a softie for this because this is what the screen looks like, and I could show it tends to put about 4 out on a screen, and it's got an arrow tab where you can, if it's 16, you can go 4 groups of 4. But in this case, it says, oh yeah, in Italy, there's this company called AG Metrology, and they offer PT with a calibration of a platinum resistance thermometer in combination with a digital readout. They offer electromechanical manometer calibration and a positive gauge and absolute pressure, liquid, medium, etc. And over here, it's got their scope. If you notice, they have this would be September 28th, 2024 is their updated. It's up to the lab to notify them to update these things. And the reason for that is they're one of our labs that we accredit. And they offer, they specialize in calibration PTs, in particular in areas that some dimensional stuff, but primarily electronic, electrical equipment, electrical measurement, and so forth. And so I just thought I would. Okay. Now, I went to the A2LA website. They have a different way of. I think that we're a little bit more compact, but I think that's just us. They certainly have a very broad base, and their screens are kind of like to narrow you down a little bit. And but I did notice, I did the same search for roughly the same thing, and it came up that there were 3 that they accredit that meet those same types of things that I did for AG metrology, and so but you get again, you can narrow things down, you can expand things out, and so forth. I went to ANAB, and the way they kind of present the scopes, where you could actually pull the scopes down, and see them. They kind of, it's like a 3-screen operation in a sense. So, but again, you can see from the panels that you can indicate, and I said all countries, I said all states. I didn't restrict it to any, to any particular thing. And but again, I wanted to get the same kind of like the equivalent labs selection basis. And one, they found 3, and one of them just happened to be the National Association for Proficiency Testing, NAPT, and they're located in Minnesota, and they met those. If you look down in the lower left, it says fields was acoustic, calibration, electrical, mass, other, and thermal. So I had zeroed in on electrical. So each of the companies has a little bit different take on how what's their keywords and so forth. I was when I was putting this together, I had real difficulty. I think they were having. I did in the past. I haven't had a problem getting things from IAS. On this day, they were for some reason it wasn't very responsive, and if you notice, they have a PT provider accreditation, and over here it says search proficiency testing providers, and you can do that on IAS. It's not that I was trying to make them look bad or anything. It's just that day they might have been doing something with their system and they were updating it or something. So again, those are resources that you can look at. You could look at the accrediting body folks from in Mexico and also Canada, and look for those. I just was trying to pick on and just say, well, I'm going to limit it just to give a flavor for the ones in the we identify as American proficiency test accrediting bodies. So I think the EPTIS particular is, again, it's a little tricky to use, not overly difficult, but just a little, sometimes you and you wonder sometimes because you might get something in there that you go to look at that organization's scope, and somebody might have just misentered something, one of their selection criteria or something like that, such that they pop up and you'd say, I've looked at the scope, this is not a good fit. Well, you just roll with it, so. But they certainly have, I forget the total number is over 7,000 entries currently. Now, one of the things regarding proficiency testing is just like 17025, ISO IEC 17025 2017 applies to calibration and testing, but also to other fields as well. For proficiency test providers, the ISO IEC 17043 was updated in 2023. So why did they do that? Well, it harmonizes it more with 2017 because its last revision was prior to 2017 in terms of technical requirements and structure. It harmonizes with the statistical document, which was also recently updated. And that was in 2022 in terms of terminology. It incorporates the requirements from ISO CASCO, that's the conformity assessment group of ISO, and their procedure 33. That's inside baseball stuff, folks. The inclusion of the requirement that testing activities, calibration activities, and PT item production conform to the relevant requirements of any other ISO conformity assessment standards. And it deleted some annexes. So in general, it aligned itself with like a lot of the other ISO documents a little bit better. And without going into detail, because that's not really the point of this particular presentation, but it has some of the basics of the structure, from everything from scope, the scope of the document itself, various normative references, terms and definitions, general requirements on impartiality and confidentiality, structural requirements, resource requirements. This is kind of like the heavy part of it, the general, personnel, resources, facilities, environmental conditions, externally provided products and services, process requirements, and management system requirements. One of the things I've said is you can be a very good proficiency test provider for a broad spectrum of materials and not have a laboratory or what would be the equivalent of a laboratory. You can subcontract that all out. You're just a good contractor. And you'd say, well, if you don't do any testing, you don't do any calibration, well, what do they do for PT? And you say, well, no, I am a PT provider. So one of the things I thought, and then I just actually occurred to me this morning. One of the PT providers that is an who is an A2LA PT provider is a gentleman that also used to do assessments. He does, I think he probably still does assessments. back when I was doing assessments for PJLA, and his name was Heinrich Nielsen. And he and I would end up on assessments together, and he was starting this PT operation, and he was kind of conveying to me all the things that can go wrong in a structured PT round if you have to ship something around by, the various types of things available in the United States, like the post office or even FedEx. He says, I have lost so many artifacts just shipping things around. And he says, so what ends up, and he has to, sometimes he has to kind of like start up again with another artifact. Sometimes he has to do things and so forth. So I kind of told him, and he runs programs where he doesn't himself actually do a fair number of them where he does not actually do the measurement and things of that nature. But but the big thing was, he says, you send, sometimes if you got these programs where you don't make 100 of every sample, and then you send the 100 samples out. So you have to worry there about are the samples homogeneous and so forth. But when you have these items where you calibrate, here's the thing, calibrate it, measure it, send it back, you look at it, you make sure it's not damaged, you send it out to somebody else. He says, every time that thing crosses the threshold, he says, I'm just glad it comes back. So, but that's so, but you can be a PT provider and not handle anything like that. We do have a PT provider that does have some of that we accredit, but also does a lot of things on computer with very high resolution imaging of things that you would look at for plate count of tests, or looking for something that would be an optical inspection, eye inspect, or or even something that'd be under a microscope. And technically they could send that same image out to over 1,000 participants. No problem at all. It would just be on the computer. So we're
going a little bit over time. I'm sorry I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm watching the questions come in, and there's quite a bit of questions.
Okay.
So I didn't know if we could try to, I think you're on your last slide.
Pretty much.
Okay. So I don't know if there was anything. Okay. And then these slides will be available as well. This looks like just a recap of the ILAC documents and why we make PL1, it appears.
Right.
So I think that wrapped up pretty much your slides.
Yep.
Outlining the requirements. Okay. Very good. I just don't want to lose some people. I know we usually stick to about 45 minutes to an hour, and I just don't want to, I want people to be able to hear some of the questions.
Okay.
If possible.
Yeah, this is expanding on the PJLA policy, PL1, which we touched based a little bit on how we kind of view what things group together, and where would you have to have some sort of approval and review by the either PJLA staff, or we would have the assessor make that type of review and evaluation.
Yeah, so, and this, go ahead, Doug, sorry.
In terms of us, like I said, the ISO IEC 17043 was just updated here last year. So they normally have a 3-year transition period. And so that's what we will probably be looking at, that we would move all of our PT providers to the revised document over a 3-year period. Now the thing is that for there's been a subsequent communication that said that that's going to they're going to this is from the ILAC group, that they said, well, they're going to make it the 31st of May of 2026, which is pretty generous. Okay, so here we are for questions.
All right. Okay, thank you, Doug. If you could just click on the next slide real quick. So I do have some questions here, but while I'm waiting for some more to populate in, just wanted you to take a look at, we do have a class coming up next week. We've been doing these, been really successful workshops. I'm sorry, the overview course every one a quarter we do, pretty reasonable price. Its class is still open for next week. I'm still seeing people register today. It's a 2-day virtual 17025 overview course. And you do get a certificate for participating in that. And also we have a free workshop, which we've been doing those monthly now on top of our webinars, coming up in December on documenting and maintaining a quality management system. So the workshop is completely free. The course next week is at a limited price, but we've been getting great feedback on those. So, please take advantage. We'll also have our courses for 2025 published very soon and some additional free webinars. So stay tuned to our website for those. Okay, so why don't we go ahead, Doug, and thank you very much for your presentation. I know it's a lot of information. And like you said, you can go on probably for, an hour on each of those separate topics. So slides will be available. I'm going to go ahead and answer this first question that came in. Are you able to send me the PT scheduled documents? So that, I believe what it's being referred to is the LF81 form. That is available if you go to our website, pjlabs.com, and go under resources or under PT, I believe on our website. You can download the LF81 form and you can utilize that to make your PT schedule. Like Doug said, you don't have to use that form if you have your own, but have something that looks similar to that and to ensure you're meeting the PJLA PO1 requirements for frequency. Also, I know Doug I know you touched upon this, but in a few slides before that, there has been a lot of questions about when do I get my PT plan approved. A few slides before that, and this again will be available. If you're doing third-party proficiency testing or interlab with another facility, you do not need to seek PJLA approval. You do need to have a plan and you need to follow the frequency and requirements that's in the policy. The only time you need to seek PJLA approval is when you decide to do intralab internally within your own facility, or repeatability studies would be something that we would want to see the reasoning why, your procedure for doing it, and what particular parts you're going to be doing that with. That's something you need to send in to our headquarters office. We'll have it looked at, and if we approve it, we send you back an approval. And then your assessor is notified at the next assessment, or sometimes even during that assessment, that it's been approved. I'll take the next question too, Doug. Does PJLA allow the assessor to make decisions based on enrollments, performance, once a nonconformance is issued to a CAB? So here, what I'm reading is that perhaps if you get a nonconformity for not performing a proficiency test, maybe, and then you would go ahead and enroll in one. So yes, the assessor then would take a look at it to make sure that it's appropriate. Obviously, you're responsible for making sure that the PT is appropriate for what you're doing, but the assessor then would take a look at that to address that particular nonconformity. Okay, so Doug, one of the questions that came in was, do PT providers distinguish between source and measure functions? For example, if in scope I have volt/current generate measure and I test a DMM, digital multimeter, sent to me by a 17043 provider, will this cover only the measure function on my scope or the generate as well? Since we have to source and read from a digital multimeter, calculate uncertainty considering our source as well. So I think what they're asking is if they're doing multiple things on a multimeter, is that PT going to cover that?
I would say that it would be fine if you say, this is going to be on my plan. I will do measure this first time, and I'm going to do this again within this concept of the plan, and I will do generate the next time. and just see if it makes a difference. That's all I would do that. Either that or yeah, this has been asked before. In some cases, once you're hooked up for things to actually do it, you could do both, and doesn't take that much time. But again, it depends on who the PT provider, what kind of PT it is, in a sense, and then what the provider's program was set up for as well.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. Next question is, would an example of discipline and subdiscipline for a food safety lab be testing for listeria and the different matrices that are being tested for listeria?
In that regard, if it makes, it's one of those things, if it makes a difference, then you would say, well, I might want to go, the subdiscipline is, or the discipline is microbial testing, in a sense, or we have a title for that. And then you'd say, well, I'm going to focus on, I'm going to test for listeria. Well, that's is from based on your knowledge, experience, and whatnot. If you can do listeria, you can do other things. If you say, no, I think I would look for listeria in this particular material because it's more of an issue, and I wouldn't necessarily look at that in that much of detail for the other. I'm not a big bio person, so but I would say that you can have, I would think, again, you might want to take a look and say, well, I've got a discipline and a subdiscipline, but I've got within that subdiscipline, there's actually a couple other subdisciplines, and structure it that way. And again, what's one of the things we would look at in terms of the plan, in terms of how you can construct your plan, is what sort of risks are you trying to address? So if you say, well, I would really need to, because of my potential customers and also knowing what I know about these types of pathogens and things of that, and food, if that I want to look, I would want to look at that. If I can do this and I can do that, then I pretty much can do anything in between, in terms of addressing things within that overall subdiscipline.
Okay.
Again, one of those things with that is I'd always watch out that in terms of, you got to look at whatever type of regulatory type things are appropriate in that particular area, especially for maybe the product, because of product and things of that nature. So it's just like again, not being overly conversant in this area, but I would think that things like what we're seeing as the number of labs are growing, and the interest in is like in the cannabis area, where you're looking for cannabis in various types of things that cannabinoids get infused into, various types of things, everything from gummies to cookies to something else. It's that you'd want to look at. I want to be able to demonstrate sufficiently that I'm pretty confident that when we do look for listeria or some particular set of pathogens, that regardless of the product, we can do a good job in analyzing for that, and I can show you the results.
All right, and then the last question we have, and I think you might have touched upon this a little bit, is that what changes, if any, is PJLA making to comply with the revised P9? So P9, yes, you're correct, just came out last year with implementation for January of 2025. So we haven't announced it yet, but all of our policies actually are going to be revised soon. The P9 policy or PL1 PJLA policy based on the ILAC P9, there's a lot of talk in there about risk, and Doug talked about that as well. We have updated our policy to clarify some of the common questions we get about disciplines and fields and all that, to make sure that it's clear to the laboratories about how to set up a PT. But we have redesigned the policy a little bit, and is not out publicly just yet because we're in the process of getting all of our policies voted on by our technical committee. So those should be coming out probably within the next, I would say, 30 days. So if you're a client or you sign up to our website, you will see a update notification come out with the effective date. Nothing that I think will impact the laboratories, particularly with what you're really already doing. But we will be doing a webinar on any of those changes, again, on our policies. Okay, so I think that's all the time we have. Doug, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today and your contribution to PJLA, of course. If there's any other questions, you can feel free. I think Doug has his email address maybe on the next slide, or you can email myself. Doug, if you click on the next slide, you might have that posted.
Yep.
And then we would be happy to answer any of your questions. Some of you might not even be aware, but Doug actually behind the scenes, if any of you are turning in any of your PT plans to get approved, Doug does a lot of them and reviews them. So, you know, he's part of that whole alternative process that we allow and with seeking our approval. But there's our email addresses there. If anything comes up and you didn't get a chance to ask directly to Doug today. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. I will go ahead and close the webinar, and thank you all for attending. Take care.